Hey, Changemaker! Welcome to Learning for Good, the only podcast that teaches nonprofit leaders how to leverage training to drive performance, improve capacity, and fuel their mission impact. Do you ever feel like your nonprofit is growing, but your people just aren't keeping up? Or like you're fixing the same problems over and over? Do you wonder how to build confident, capable staff who know how to lead, not just execute? If we haven't met yet, I'm Heather, and I know how hard it can feel to get people to do what's expected of them. Trust me, I have 3 kids. I've tried telling people what to do and how. I've tried the traditional training approaches, and I realized that just doesn't work. And that's when I started researching what does work. Now I help mission-driven leaders use learning to drive performance, build capacity, and make change that lasts. And I'm sharing it all on this podcast. So block your calendar, turn off your Teams or Slack chat, and let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. One thing I was not prepared for as a parent was the number of hypothetical questions I'd have to answer on every single car ride. Literally every time we get in the car to go somewhere, my kids start hitting me with questions. Questions I have no reason to know the answer to. Why did Miss Lori turn left on that street? I don't know. I'm not Miss Lori. Did Madison's parents name her after someone in their family? I have no idea. I don't even know Madison's parents, right? Like, I literally don't know. And I have no reason to know. But they are curious. And their curious minds start to ask questions. And those questions lead to learning. So while I usually respond with, I don't know, I want them to keep asking questions of others, of themselves, of the world around them, because that is learning. And really, that's what we want to create in our organizations. People who love to learn, people who are curious, people who ask the questions. And the best way to make sure that happens, it's to have a strong learning culture. But what is a learning culture and how do we create it? It can start to feel a little bit like a buzzword rather than an achievable goal. So I'm sitting down with Yogi Mueller today to learn his approach to learning cultures. It's time to get curious. Let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. Yogi Mueller is a leadership coach, speaker, and author of The Great Slapping, a raw and reflective book about the kind of mentorship that pushes people to grow, not just feel good. With over 20 years of experience designing talent development programs for major brands like Disney, he has worked with executives, frontline teams, and rising leaders across industries. What sets him apart? Yogi is a master storyteller and a former professional comedian who knows how to keep an audience hooked while delivering meaningful takeaways. He uses story not as filler, but as a powerful teaching tool that brings leadership lessons to life. He is also the creator of the Grit Index Assessment, a leadership self-awareness tool that helps people understand how they really show up when it comes to feedback, reflection, and growth. Yogi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I've been looking forward to this.
I am excited for our conversation. I feel like everywhere you turn, people are talking about learning cultures and have been for years, decades. But it feels a little abstract. It feels a little mushy, right? So I'm excited to dive a little deeper with you today and hear more about what a learning culture is and your approach to creating it. Before we get there, though, I always start with one question, and that is, tell us a little bit about your career journey. I found it helpful to hear that in your own words. How did you get here? Why this? Why now? Now you're an author. Tell us about your career journey.
Well, thank you. So I'm Yogi Mueller out of Orlando, Florida. And I, like many in our profession, fell into it. We didn't grow up going, I want to be a talent development professional. It is just something that we found a propensity and a love for. And even though we didn't know there was a construct called L&D or talent development, I was involved with internships or training the trainers or doing some classes, or they asked me to do a class on this. And it wasn't until I spent my time at Disney that I really focused my journey and realized, oh my Lord, I can do this for a living, my passion, and develop others and pay the mortgage. So that was the genesis of that. The reason I wrote a book, the reason I hung out my shingle for craft leadership is I was with the company for 13, 14 years, ended up as the VP of talent development, and we were bought out. Like I like to say, they freed me up to pursue my entrepreneurial dreams because of that acquisition. So that's why you and I are talking today. That happened about a year ago. So this is a culmination of a year's worth of work.
Well, I would say it's a culmination of a career's worth of work that you've been able to pull together and bring together in the last year. And I'm excited for that. I'm excited to learn from you and all of your different experience today. So we're talking about learning cultures today. Again, it can feel a little bit like a buzzword. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page, talking the same language. What is a learning culture? And one of the ways I like to think about things like this is using the senses. So what is it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? Those kinds of things. Can you help paint that picture for us?
I can. I am just pleased that you opened the show with that story about the questioning, because I could not think of a more pure description of what a positive and investing learning culture is. To take that little cute little story apart, you have an individual in your child that is, like you said, curious, is interested in growing, in learning more. And you as a parent encourage that. You send them to great schools. You encourage them to read and to play and to create and to nurture that inquisitive sense about that. So there's that. Then you also have a complete lack of fear of asking questions. Questions that are maybe out in left field, that the child knows there's no judgment there. The child knows that they're not going to be punished for asking questions or demonstrating they don't know an answer or feeling bad about their self-worth or self-confidence because they have to ask a question. You as the parent/leader were uber authentic and aware of the fact you didn't know the answers. You don't have to be the all-knowing. You are as vulnerable and have more to learn as a leader, as a parent, and you recognize that. So you don't spout off the first thing to come to your head because it makes you look great or makes you feel powerful. You said, I don't know. But in saying I don't know, you're going to maybe try to find out, or the child sees you as authentic and that, yes, don't necessarily have to have all the answers. I was just taking all those notes when you were saying that opening, because I think that is the microcosm of what a learning culture is. It is creativity. It is the desire to learn. It's the interest in finding these answers and learning and growing in a free environment to do so, and leaders that respect that and also reflect that vulnerability as well. That was a great story. I think we can end the podcast here. That was great.
When people ask questions, say you don't know.
I mean,
the end.
Yeah, exactly. You can get into the details and things like that, but how many organizations have we both worked for, or that we know of, or have other people to work for, that they're terrified of raising their hand? Yeah. They're terrified of showing any type of weakness in their knowledge base or their skill base. That is so disheartening to have that happen. Or leaders always have an answer, or always feel they have to front of some way and not show any vulnerability. I think the true organizations that have the ability to grow not just farther or stronger, but deeper, have leaders and have that culture that share those characteristics.
I love that. And I love that you added that vulnerability piece as well. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit about some of your experiences and things you've done over the course of your career, but how has your experience influenced your view of learning culture and its importance?
Great question. I think we're all amalgamations of the great environments that we work for and the not so great environments to work for. I think knowing what not to do is just as important as what to do when you are leading an organization or driving learning strategy in an organization. I think, from my experience, the leaders that have that passion, that lead the vision, that communicate the vision. And they have in that message an encouragement and a desire for their team to grow and to learn more, to do more, to be better, to do better. I think that permeates to all areas of the organization where there is an intrinsic reward, not maybe monetary reward, but also an intrinsic reward from every individual employee or member of that organization to say, I don't know, and to then follow up and learn how to do it. If there's any semblance of a checked box, or this is strictly for compliance to make sure that we pass some sort of insurance thing, but not for the enrichment and development of the people, I think that's the opposite end of that spectrum, where you yawn and you roll your eyes. And I heard something the other day, this might add to another question you have on, but there are studies that say if training is introduced and sponsored by operations, it's supported. But when it's supported, or when it's introduced and supported by HR, people roll their eyes. I paused after reading that, and I'm like, I've seen that. And I think that's something from a learning culture, when you have that desire to learn, tag with the burdensome kind of things that are associated with HR, that's a challenge. And I know right now the big buzzword is CEOs are, I want to eliminate HR and become people culture. That's a start, but that's just a name. We'll see how far that goes.
For sure. Words matter. So
I do.
It's a start, and we'll see what happens. I work for a lot of organizations and for organizations in the nonprofit sector that I feel like do have a good learning culture. There is this desire to learn. There is this desire to provide training opportunities, coaching, those kinds of things to make sure that people have what they need. And that's great, but it's not always the case. And to your point, sometimes when training is introduced from HR, it's less exciting, less well received than it is from operations. And really in the learning culture, it shouldn't matter where it's coming from. If there is good intent and the people have a desire to learn, if they're curious, people are being vulnerable in that process, then we should be receptive to learning. So break it down for us a little bit. How do you actually build that learning culture? How do you get to that place where it's welcomed and people are genuinely curious and they can ask those questions and they feel safe doing so?
Great question again. I think we have to go to my spirit animal, Simon Sinek, and look at the golden circle as to the why. And I think, as you and I both know, one of the most powerful questions that we can ask as a learning professional is, well, why do you think that? Why do you think we need this training? And to really dig to the reasons. And so I think the first thing you have to look at is where the leadership is, where the C-suite is, or the executive committee, depending on how big your organization is. And really ascertain, either they're asking for it, we want more training or more learning and development or more of this. Why? What's the reason behind that? And then really understand where they're coming from. If you don't have that support from leadership, that is a box that you checked. And I work for organizations where they say something, oh, we want this, and you do amazing work to put together a product, but it fizzles out because there's no accountability, there's no support, and that's going to come from leadership. So learning culture is not the product. It's the environment that product grows in. You can have the most beautiful flower in the world, but if you put it in a pot without soil or water or nutrients, it's going to die. And so understanding what that is, what is the why? Why do they want to grow their team? Why do they want a leadership development program? Why do they want a 360 program? Why do they want internship program? I remember asking a leader, said, hey, we want all this internship program. And I asked them why. They didn't have an answer for me. So I was really struggling to put something together that they're going to support because there was no outcome. There was no ROI in their eyes. It was just training for the sake of training. So that's where I would start. I would start with the leadership and really ascertain the reasons behind them wanting that. And then working with them to connect their operational goals, connect their strategies, connect and this is important across the board, even in existing cultures. If you're not doing everything that's tied directly to that strategic intent, then you're just numbers. Then you're just fun classes that people go to. But when you tie strategically to that, then your product has meaning and your ROI has meaning.
I love these two components, for lack of a better word, for building this learning culture. We want to make sure we have support from leadership, and we do that by getting to the why, that deeper level of why this request has come through, and connecting anything we create to operational goals and strategies, because then it's seen as strategic. It's helping drive the mission or whatever we're trying to accomplish. And so there's a purpose behind it. So that helps us as strategic thinkers, strategic partners, making sure that we have that buy-in, we have that support, and we know exactly how what gets created is having an impact. Are there things we should be doing for the learners, for lack of a better word, themselves? Are there things that we can do to help them be more curious or to have that desire to learn? Or is that more innate in what they're coming to the organization with? Or how do you feel about, like, how do we influence the people themselves?
That's a great question. And because I've been in organizations where the leadership talks a big game, but when you go down the front line, it does not exist. So the old phrase is measure what you find important. So ensure that there's some way that there is leadership incentive, whatever that looks like in the organization, but it's measured. Because how many times have you heard frontline leaders not sending the people to training because they can't afford to take them off the floor? Well, that's because in that organization, the value of learning is below the product that frontline person is doing. They don't understand investment might help produce more product. They're in the know. Well, that kind of awareness, that kind of paradigm shifting has to come from the top down. It has to come from that particular sense where they're saying, look, I know you're taking the person off the floor. In your eyes, that's this metric. However, this is important for them to produce more metric, more widgets, whatever you're talking about at that time. But I also think you need a bottom-up approach. And I hate talking top-bottom in org structures. That's so like 1950s. But there has to be a grassroots encouragement of that. Innovation programs, really creating a robust learning environment, learning ecosystem, I think is a better word, that is very clean in terms of this path, this learning curriculum, and allowing freedom, allowing flexibility, allowing choice in terms of medium. Those types of things, putting more power in the hands of the front line in terms of the rank and file, creates that groundswell of support and demand for culture. And then you have the top down saying, hey, look, this is important strategically. That will meet in the middle. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, especially if you're entering an entrenched culture. And so that's going to take a lot of work. What do they say? You got to market first before you sell. And that might have to happen. But you need to really look at that bi-directional approach in establishing a good culture.
Do you wish you could connect with other nonprofit learning and development leaders? I know what it feels like to want someone to bounce ideas off of and to learn from, someone who really understands you and your work. Imagine if you could have a simple way to meet people in the field, ask questions, and share information. That's why I created the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective, where nonprofit L&D, talent management, and DEI leaders can connect with each other quickly and easily in a virtual space. When you join this community, you will walk away with a new, diverse, and powerful network and a sounding board for your staff development needs. So if you're ready to exchange ideas and collaborate with your peers, come join the Nonprofit L&D Collective.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost build the case and then create that ecosystem where people have some choice and autonomy in how they meet the goals, meet the objectives. And so then you're getting their interest, you're picking their interest, you're getting them involved in a way that feels really good to them, but you've already built the case across the organization. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've definitely experienced where, especially when it gets down to frontline leaders, right? Because there's so much turnover in nonprofits. It's, well, why do we want to invest in them when they're not going to be here in a few weeks, whatever the case is. And so there comes this almost like you have to earn it. You have to earn your way into training. You have to earn your way into leadership development programs and things like that. So I think talking their language, building that case for why it's important, even if someone leaves, that can be a really valuable part of the process. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Can I add something to that? Because I just had a conversation with somebody yesterday that there needs to be a mind shift in leadership. When you're withholding information to help somebody better in their job, who does that benefit? I understand in some cases you have high potential programs, but you don't neglect the others. And I was talking to somebody in the first responder world, and they said mentorship really doesn't exist in that sense in the first responder world, because my dad was a cop, but he was a cop for 30 years. Now, if the cop is there for 3 years, that's a long time. And people don't see that. Well, they see the 30 years as the milestone. 3 years, that's nothing. But let me tell you, 3 years for a 30-year-old, that's a lifetime, 3 years. So we need, as leaders, need to shift our mindset. If we want people to stay, that investment has to hear. How many times do you hear when they interview Gen Zs that one of the number one things they look for in an employer, whether it's nonprofit or profit, is I need to know that employer cares about me. Well, if you're withholding training until they reach some sort of tenure milestone, you don't care about the person. And I think the more you invest earlier in the person, recognize that potential, and you create that culture that, hey, you hit the ground running. And in fact, in the interview process, here's a path. The last thing I created in my last organization was something called the Career Accelerator Series, where recruiters could sit down and show a brand new hire, hey, this is where you are now. These are all the programs that are in place, and this is where you could be in 5 years. That's what's going to keep somebody from 5 years, not the mystery of what might be behind the curtain that you're not willing to pull back.
For sure. And one thing I've talked a little bit about, probably not as much on the podcast as I should, in nonprofits specifically, if you're creating a good experience and that employee leaves, you've still created a good experience. So that employee becomes a volunteer, becomes a donor, tell other people about your organization. That's a win, even if they leave. And even if you've invested in them and they leave, that's a win for the organization. So yeah, I totally agree. We can't use it as a carrot system anymore.
No, loyalty hasn't existed as a currency from an employee standpoint or employee standpoint for quite some time.
Yep.
And that mindset needs to change.
Very true. So speaking of things that need to change, what are the challenges that organizations face when building a learning culture?
Well, I was thinking about this when thinking about applying learning culture to the nonprofits world, and I see it also in the world, and that's resources and funding, right? I hear all the time in an organization, regardless of how big or how small, is, well, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough funding. And to me, that creates an immediate definition of, or immediate tie to learning is about events, or learning is about technology. And it's not. It's ethereal. It stands outside the physical a little bit. And leaders in learning organizations will feel stymied because of resources. And I know this is a fact in nonprofits. Obviously, funding is very important and oftentimes limited. So that may limit where people's mindset is or where they can take a learning culture. I mentioned mentorship, for example. Creating a mentorship program in an organization theoretically can have zero cost other than an hourly wage because it needs to be done on the clock. But outside of that, that knowledge and experience transfer is free. You don't need flashy technology. You don't need the biggest and best classrooms with the best technology in order to make that learning stick. Learning culture comes from something that you fire up from the inside. All those other things, those trappings of technology and resources and money and even travel these days, because you can be not as effective, but you can be pretty effective virtually and still create a sense that, yeah, this company is investing in who I am and where I want to be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll try to link to it in the show notes, but I have a former podcast episode with low-cost leadership development activities. It's tempting to say, well, we don't have money for that, or we don't have the resources for that. But there are things that we can do that don't have a huge cost, but they do have a huge impact. And so really getting creative as we face those challenges and figuring out ways to meet those needs despite
the crutch
challenges.
You might not have the flashiest thing that's on the cover of TD magazine.
Right.
But that doesn't degrade from the impact that you're having on the individual.
Absolutely. It's funny. That's actually one of the reasons I tell people when I'm talking about the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective, which is the private community that I created, one of the reasons I tell people I created that is I can remember when I was working for a national nonprofit, going to a conference, sitting through a session. It was a long time ago. So it was the flashy technology of VR or something like that, which now it would be AI or whatever else. But at the time, and I'm sitting through the session and I'm like, well, that's great that you did that. But did you do it once and then create a session about it? And so now we all think that you're amazing and you do this all the time? Or is this something you do regularly? And if so, is it something that we should be doing as a nonprofit, and are other nonprofits doing this? And like really starting to go down that rabbit hole of wanting to benchmark and share ideas with other organizations that were similar in similar challenges, similar situations, similar funding streams, similar sizes, and say, hey, what are you doing? And here's what we're doing. Here's what's working for us. And if you don't know the person sitting in your seat in another nonprofit, there was really no way to do that. And so that was part of the reasoning for creating the collective, was just to be able to bring people together and share in that way. Because it's easy to say, well, we just don't have the money for that, or we don't have the time for that, or we don't have the technology for that. When in reality, there are so many things that we can do to help build that learning culture and to provide opportunities to people throughout the organization.
Now, community is so important, and I'm glad you did that, because being shown all the dog and pony show at these conferences can be very diminishing in terms of where you feel your ability is to make change. And one of the things that has always helped me is I try to keep the mindset that an L&D relationship in an organization is between two people, not a department and an organization. Because you need to look at learning, one key does not unlock every door, right? So you can have these big flashy leadership manager conferences, but if you're not truly making that impact on an individual level, I think you're failing. You're throwing a dart at a board that's 5 miles down the road, right? And especially in nonprofits and in tight resourced organizations, those one-on-one interactions that you have are not flashy. They're not AI or VR driven, right? It's one-on-one, genuine, hey, I believe you are better than you are right now and you have the potential to get there. Let me help you get there. And that's where the true power is, to really germinate that learning culture and to move mountains when you don't have the money to do so.
So good. So good, Yogi. All right. For those who are, their brains are spinning right now, they're trying to figure out, what do I do next? What advice do you have for people who are starting to build a learning culture?
What do I have personally as a tool or advice, or help me with that context of that question?
Yep. Advice, but whatever you want to share is great.
I think first take stock of your world, of your organization. What's the pulse of your learning culture? I would hate to have you spend time, money, and resources building something that is a flavor of the month because the culture doesn't support it. We've all been there, let me tell you. That's where I would start. Really understand what is the desire and what is the demand for learning in that organization, bottom up, top down. And once you have that, and that's having straightforward, honest conversations with the stakeholders in all of those areas that you're involved, and really uncover what is the truth that people are looking for in that organization. And can that be solved with one-on-one interactions, inexpensive and low cost and low resource programs that are extremely effective and not caught up in the hype and the technology? If that's what your CEO is looking for and they have the budget to do it, rock and roll. That's just a nice playground to play in. But it's not necessarily where the rubber is going to hit the road. So have those conversations. If you were a learning professional, Heather, and I said, tell me about the learning culture in your organization. If you have a wishy-washy answer, I would turn that right back around and say, figure that out and start there.
Yeah, I feel like so much of what we do really comes back to conversations and making sure that we understand what it is we're solving for, what the true challenges are, what are the root causes of that. And to your point, making sure that whatever we do is supported and being a strategic partner in that process. So thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing more about learning cultures.
I'm very passionate, and Heather, seriously, for the work that you're doing with the organizations you're doing, it is so important because often those organizations and the individuals supporting and driving the learning in those organizations, they may be beating themselves over the head because of those resource issues. And the fact that you created a community that helps inspire them and let them know that, hey, they're not alone in these challenges and there may be best practices out there that are very successful. You're helping build those bridges to get there. So it's my pleasure and honor to support you in the work that you do for that.
Oh, thank you, Yogi. I appreciate that. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
Yogi shared so much good stuff with us today. And I think it really comes down to we want to create an environment where people feel safe to ask questions, where leaders can say, I don't know. And that's an okay response. Where L&D has leadership support, where learning strategy is connected to operational strategy, and where resources are not constraints, but opportunities to innovate. And I think when we can do these things, we can operate in these ways, we can build a learning culture. I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.
Hey friend, was this episode helpful for you? Did you like what you heard? Do you want more content like this? Here are 3 things you can do. Hit subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice, share this episode with a colleague. This means so much to me personally. I read every review, but it also helps me learn what content you like most so I can create more of what you want. All right, turn that Teams or Slack chat back on when you're ready, and I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.